Oh, hello. It has been a while since I've had my last little podcast episode. When I started this little podcast, I wanted to do it when I had an idea that I felt was worth talking about, something that really interested me. Of course, when I had the time, and didn't want to necessarily commit to just a set schedule just for the heck of it. And I suppose that's also led me to perhaps not being at all consistent in any concept, but I'm also okay with that. The goal of this isn't necessarily just to grow an audience. That certainly hasn't been happening. And that's fine because I'm not here necessarily to do that. This isn't a product that I'm trying to grow. This is just something I'm kind of enjoying for myself. And because I get to do that, I get to talk about things that interest me. And I have a little bit more time now. I've been really focused on launching new products, again, as an actual product manager rather than a product influencer. But shots fired. Moving past that, what I want to talk about, again, gets a little bit more into the analytics side of things, which I've talked about a few times. I always love the Groupon story. I've told this before about essentially how Groupon, they talked with the CEO, the brief story, but I won't tell the whole story again, but they actually asked the CEO after he had sort of been let go, when did he recognize things were going downhill? And it was when someone said, hey, we should send 2 emails a day because that's what the data says is really working. And he approved it because they were data driven, but thought to himself, why? Who wants to receive 2 emails a day? And what it brings to me, I've talked in the past about what are some things you can take away from that, but what it gets to is this larger strategy that has to exist around what it is you're trying to achieve and where it is you want to position that specific goal. And what that means in practice is that your analytics, oftentimes, you're not just going towards a specific maxima. If you were to think about what analytics can do, you can't start from zero, start from absolutely nothing, and analytics your way to $10 billion in revenue. You just can't do it. That's not what analytics does. Analytics is a phenomenal way to increase your approach to a local maxima, but it doesn't necessarily get you to a maximum. And so if you were to think about a graph with several different bell curves on, or a line rather, right, with some high peaks and some low peaks and some troughs, and then of course there's a true maximum somewhere. You can think of it like a mountain, range where you've got some higher peaks. If yours just dropped on a line, dropped somewhere along that mountain range, analytics will guide you to the next higher step. If you were to take a step left or right along that line, are you going to move up or down the conversion curve? But what that's going to get you to is not necessarily the highest peak in the mountain range. That's just going to get you to the local maxima peak. And at some point, you will reach a peak and you will not be able to increase it anymore. And you may be far away from the highest mountain peak around, because every step you were to take would decrease your ultimate altitude along that mountain range, because you're at a maxima peak. But in essence, in order for you to get to that true maximum, you're not going to be able to analytics your way out of it. And in fact, if you're to think about it as being on a mountain range, and if you have a very small peak near you and the very large maximum peak far away, Mount Everest far away along that mountain range, if you were to use analytics, it would probably tell you to go up the smaller peak, because you're going to take a step closer, and that will be, if you're already on that slope, you're going to say, just keep going that direction. And in fact, if you were to move closer to the Mount Everest peak, right, that's going to probably be a step down the current peak, the step down the current sort of slope you're on. And you would see, if you were to apply that to actual business terms, you're going to see lower conversion. You're going to see something that doesn't make quite as much sense. And that may be what you need to do in order to get to that higher true maximum. Now, that's going to be a very difficult thing to understand, because what you're not going to know is, are you actually just moving down to the base of the mountain? And, if you're just using analytics, you're not going to know if you're getting a signal towards necessarily the Mount Everest, or if you're just getting a signal down a mountain to the ground and there will be no other mountain to climb. And so, again, that's really where having a good strategy comes in. Someone or something with, some concept of experience that says, hey, I know where to position the overall structure of what it is we're trying to do. I can look at the entire mountain range and say, that's the highest peak. and set us on a goal to reach that peak. Now, I'm not going to know how to get up that peak, but I know what the highest peak is, and it's going to be up to the other tools, the analytics, et cetera, actually get us up that peak. And that's the concept behind the strategy that I think has to be kept in mind. So to think about it again in a little bit more maybe practical sense, let's step away now from the peaks. Perhaps getting into the mountain range was a little bit more convoluted than I'd hoped, but perhaps also still very useful. If we were to think about it in a very logical sense, let's just take a basic website. Let's say you have a website for a restaurant, and your restaurant is, it uses lots of shades of blue, and you sell, burgers and steaks and whatnot. And it's a very blue dominated website, and you decide, hey, I'm going to add a red button for some key information, maybe checkout or whatever. Well, in some ways, perhaps that checkout button would be good because it's so stark and drastically different, right? So maybe that helps. But if you were to add several pieces of red just peppered throughout, well, suddenly now, not only is that checkout button not going to stand out, but also you're going to just have a really mismatched website. It's not going to probably look good unless if somehow that's your brand. Shout out to, Pepsi. But if you're just having this big mismatched color set, what your analytics are going to tell you is, hey, the red's not working. Let's keep the site blue, maybe with a single pop of red along the way. And what you're going to miss out on is the fact that probably for many websites that are focused on restaurants, especially in the sort of beef category, red is a dominant color. It just makes you want to eat more. It's sort of why you see a lot of restaurants and companies use red as a primary color for food, especially those that are serving meat. And in that essence, what you need to get to probably is a red website. But if you were to start slowly moving in that direction, analytics can tell you, no, don't do that. It's sending you in the wrong direction. Instead, keep it all blue or just have this tiny pop of red. But what you really need to get to is having a red website. So you're moving in the right direction, but you're having to go down that slope of conversion until you finally hit that transition point where it starts to go up again, because now it's predominantly red with maybe just hints of blue. And then, in fact, once you iterate from there, you can just really go up at a much higher peak because now you've got a red website, which is actually more aligned with what users want and expect. And so the idea here is that as you're moving along these different curvatures, understanding that you may not be on, moving towards the true maximum. Instead, you may be moving in a true maxima. And so analytics will be able to, hopefully at every point with every test, as long as that test is done right with the right parameters, we'll be able to tell you how to increase your conversion, how to increase your overall revenue, et cetera, how to just increase usage. But it doesn't necessarily create a good strategy for mixing all of that together and saying, I'm going to achieve my absolute maximum. And instead, if you're on the wrong peak, you may only hit ever 60% and then of your conversion rate that you possibly could, maybe 60% of the possible conversions. And, you're going to say, we just can't hit any higher. We keep testing, we keep trying. And what you truly need to do is think dramatically different about your approach. Get that new strategy, get on the right mountain, get on the right peak, and then you can start to climb. And a good way to do that is to maybe do some small analytics tests, right? You could use different sort of approaches to say, if you don't have someone who necessarily has that known strategy, you can just see it. You can see, are there ways that we can quickly try a very red website? Just change all the color to red, just see what happens. See the dynamics that come through with that. You may be able to spot quickly some more of these broader approaches and their impacts that they'll have. And then, of course, general research as well is where you need to be looking at. And so the main idea I hope you take away from this is that analytics continue to, of course, be great. They're a tremendous tool set, highly encouraged use cases. And when you're running tests, to understand that where you need to use them are specifically fine-tuned within a strategy, and how can you elevate and maximize the overall output of that strategy rather than trying to use it as the strategy itself, which can lead to just a real mismatch and misguided approach to having a truly cohesive vision. I hope this has been helpful. This has been a short one. Hopefully I'll get to do a few more soon. I have a couple other ideas. And thanks for tuning in.